Picture this. You're standing in the heart of the Guatemalan jungle, surrounded by towering pyramids that pierce through the canopy like ancient skyscrapers. The air is thick with mystery, and somewhere in the distance, howler monkeys announce the dawn with their primal calls. But what if I told you that these magnificent structures weren't just monuments to forgotten gods? What if they were something far more extraordinary? Something that could rewrite everything we think we know about human history and the very fabric of time itself? Welcome to a journey that will challenge your understanding of the ancient Maya civilization. I'm your guide through this labyrinth of possibilities, where cutting-edge archaeological discoveries collide with mind-bending theoretical physics, and where the boundaries between science fiction and historical reality begin to blur. For too long we've underestimated our ancestors. We've painted them as primitive peoples who gazed at the stars with wonder, but lacked the sophistication to truly understand what they were seeing. But what if we've got it all wrong? What if the Maya didn't just observe time? What if they conquered it? Today, we're diving deep into one of the most provocative questions in alternative archaeology. Could the ancient Maya have developed technology so advanced that it allowed them to manipulate time itself? This isn't just idle speculation. This is an investigation that will take us from the precision of Mayan astronomical calculations to the cutting edge of modern quantum physics, from mysterious disappearances in Central American jungles to theoretical frameworks that suggest time travel might not be as impossible as we once believed. Before we go any further, let me be crystal clear about what we're doing here. This isn't your typical documentary that presents one theory and calls it fact. We're exploring possibilities. We're asking the questions that mainstream archaeology often refuses to ask, and we're doing it with the respect and rigor that these ancient civilizations deserve. Here's what makes this investigation so compelling. The Maya weren't just skilled astronomers. They were temporal mathematicians. Their calendar systems weren't just ways to track days and seasons. They were sophisticated computational devices that could predict celestial events thousands of years into the future with pinpoint accuracy. And their understanding of cyclical time wasn't just philosophical, it might have been practical. But here's where it gets really interesting. Recent archaeological discoveries have uncovered Mayan artifacts and architectural features that seem to serve no conventional purpose. Chambers with acoustic properties that defy explanation. Stone carvings that appear to depict technological devices, and mathematical concepts that wouldn't be rediscovered by Western science until the 20th century. So buckle up, because over the next hour we're going to explore a theory that sounds like science fiction, but might just be science fact. We'll examine the evidence, analyse the possibilities, and ask the hard questions about what it would mean if one of history's greatest civilizations had mastered the ultimate technology. The ability to travel through time. Let me start with something that should give you chills. In the depths of the Petén rainforest in northern Guatemala, there's a site called El Mirador. It's massive, bigger than many modern cities, and it was thriving over 2,000 years ago. But here's the thing that keeps archaeologists awake at night. When Spanish conquistadors first arrived in the region in the 1500s, El Mirador had been completely swallowed by the jungle. Not abandoned, swallowed. As if the Maya had simply vanished into thin air. Now, civilizations collapse all the time. We know this. Drought, warfare, political upheaval, these are the usual suspects. But the Maya collapse was different. It was too sudden, too complete, and too mysterious. One moment they were building the most sophisticated civilization in the pre-Columbian Americas, and the next moment they were gone. Not dead, gone. Their cities remained largely intact, their infrastructure still functional, their temples still pointing toward the stars with mathematical precision. What if they didn't collapse? What if they left? I know what you're thinking. This sounds like ancient alien theory territory, and trust me, we're not going there. This isn't about extraterrestrial intervention. This is about human ingenuity pushed to its absolute limits. This is about a civilization that might have been so far ahead of its time that it literally transcended time itself. Let's talk about what we know for certain about Mayan achievements. Their mathematical system was more sophisticated than anything Europe would develop for another 1,000 years. They independently invented the concept of zero, something that didn't reach Europe until the Middle Ages. Their astronomical observations were so precise that they could predict eclipses, planetary alignments, and celestial cycles with accuracy that rivals modern computer calculations. But here's where it gets weird. The Maya didn't just observe these cosmic patterns, They seem to understand them on a level that suggests they grasped concepts that wouldn't be formally recognized by Western science until Einstein's theory of relativity. They understood that time wasn't linear. They understood that past, present, and future were interconnected. And they built their entire worldview around the idea that time was cyclical, malleable, and ultimately controllable. Their calendar system wasn't just one calendar, it was multiple interlocking calendars that tracked different aspects of temporal reality. The Tzolk'in, a 260-day sacred calendar, the Hab, a 365-day solar calendar, the Long Count, which tracked enormous cycles of time spanning thousands of years, and the calendar round, which combined multiple systems to create a temporal map so complex that it makes our modern calendar look like a child's toy. But why would a civilization need such an elaborate system for tracking time unless they were doing something with time that we don't understand? Let me paint you a picture of what Mayan cities actually looked like at their peak. We're not talking about primitive settlements here. We're talking about urban centers with populations in the hundreds of thousands, sophisticated water management systems, multi-story buildings with advanced architectural techniques, art and sculpture that rivals anything produced by classical civilizations. And at the center of it all, massive pyramid complexes that weren't just religious sites, they were technological marvels. Take Chichen Itza's El Castillo pyramid. This isn't just a pile of stones, it's a three-dimensional calendar. The structure has 365 steps, corresponding to the days of the solar year. During the spring and autumn equinoxes, the shadows cast by the pyramid create the illusion of a serpent descending the steps, a visual representation of time itself moving through the structure. But here's what really gets interesting. Modern acoustic analysis has revealed that El Castillo has been designed with incredible precision to create specific sound effects. Clap your hands at the base of the pyramid, and the echo that returns sounds exactly like the call of the sacred Quetzal bird. The pyramid isn't just a calendar, it's a massive resonance chamber, and this pattern repeats across Mayan sites. Pyramids and temples with acoustic properties that seem designed to amplify and manipulate sound waves. Chambers with mathematical proportions that create specific harmonic frequencies, underground cenotes, natural wells, that were incorporated into temple complexes in ways that suggest they served purposes beyond simple water access. What if these weren't just religious sites? What if they were laboratories? Modern physics tells us that time isn't the fixed, immutable force we once thought it was. Einstein showed us that time is relative, that it can be stretched and compressed by gravity and velocity. Quantum mechanics suggests that time might be even stranger than Einstein imagined, that it might be possible to manipulate temporal flow through manipulation of fundamental forces. Here's where the Maya story gets really intriguing. Recent analysis of Mayan mathematical texts has revealed that they were working with concepts that wouldn't be formally recognized by Western mathematics until the development of calculus and advanced physics. They understood infinite series, they grasped the mathematical relationships between cosmic cycles, and they seemed to have developed computational methods that allowed them to make calculations involving enormous numbers with remarkable accuracy. Their long count calendar, for instance, tracks cycles of time spanning 5,125 years, but embedded within that system are references to much larger cycles spanning hundreds of thousands of years, millions of years, even billions of years. Why would a civilization that lasted roughly 1,000 years need to track temporal cycles spanning geological ages? Unless they weren't bound by the normal constraints of linear time? Let me share with you one of the most puzzling discoveries in Mayan archaeology. In 1952, Mexican archaeologist Alberto Rus discovered a hidden chamber deep within the Temple of Inscriptions at Palenque. Inside this chamber was the tomb of Kinich Janab Pakal, a Mayan ruler who died in 683 CE. But here's the thing that made archaeologists scratch their heads. The tomb was sealed with a massive stone slab weighing over 5 tons, and there was no way to move that slab from inside the chamber. The conventional explanation is that the tomb was sealed from above before the temple was completed. But recent analysis suggests something different. The chamber shows no signs of construction debris. The air inside was perfectly preserved, and most puzzling of all, the slab appears to have been placed with precision that would be difficult to achieve even with modern equipment. It's as if Pakal's tomb was sealed from inside the chamber itself. Now, I'm not suggesting that Pakal had supernatural powers, but what if the Maya had developed technology that allowed them to manipulate matter and energy in ways we don't understand? What if they had learned to work with forces that we're only beginning to recognize? The sarcophagus lid in Pakal's tomb is covered with intricate carvings that have puzzled researchers for decades. The conventional interpretation is that these carvings represent Pakal's journey into the underworld. But if you look at the imagery with fresh eyes, it's hard not to see something that looks remarkably like a technological device. Pakal appears to be operating some kind of complex mechanism, surrounded by what could be control panels, exhaust systems, and navigational equipment. Again, I'm not saying this is proof of ancient technology, but I am saying it's worth asking the question, what if Mayan religious imagery wasn't purely symbolic? What if it was also technical documentation? The Maya left us thousands of codices, bark paper books filled with hieroglyphic texts. But here's the tragic part. Spanish conquistadors and missionaries destroyed most of these books, believing them to be works of the devil. Only 4 complete codices survive today, and they're focused primarily on astronomical and calendar calculations. But what was in the books that were destroyed? What knowledge did we lose when those flames consumed centuries of accumulated wisdom? We know from surviving fragments that the Maya had detailed knowledge of planetary movements, eclipse cycles, and celestial mechanics. They tracked Venus with such precision that they could predict its position years in advance. They understood the relationship between solar and lunar cycles, and they seemed to grasp astronomical concepts that European science wouldn't discover until the development of advanced telescopes. But there are hints that their knowledge went far beyond astronomy. Some of the surviving texts contain references to mathematical concepts that seem to deal with the manipulation of time itself. Calculations involving what appear to be temporal coordinates. References to doors and pathways that could connect different time periods. What if the Maya weren't just observing the cosmos? What if they were mapping it as a navigational aid? Here's something that will make you question everything you think you know about the Maya collapse. In the 9th century CE, at the height of Mayan civilization, something unprecedented happened. Across the entire Mayan world, construction stopped. Not gradually, suddenly, mid-project. Unfinished buildings were abandoned with tools still lying where workers had dropped them. Half-completed murals were left with paintbrushes still wet. This wasn't a gradual decline. This wasn't conquest or natural disaster. This was abandonment so sudden and complete that it suggests the Maya had somewhere else to go. Archaeological evidence shows that many Mayan cities were abandoned in good condition. Food stores were left untouched. Valuable objects remained in place. Even royal palaces were left intact, as if their occupants had simply stepped out for a moment and never returned. Where did they go? The conventional explanation involves drought, warfare, and social collapse, and certainly there's evidence for all of these factors. But the pattern of abandonment doesn't match what we see in other civilizational collapses. Usually, when societies fall apart, they do so messily. There are signs of struggle, of desperate attempts to maintain order, of gradual degradation. The Mayan abandonment was different. It was clean. It was organized. It was almost as if it was planned. What if it was? Recent discoveries in Mayan sites have uncovered something that mainstream archaeology has struggled to explain. Chambers and passages that seem to serve no conventional purpose. These aren't storage rooms or ceremonial spaces. They're technical facilities with features that suggest they were designed for purposes we don't understand. At sites like Tikal and El Mirador, ground-penetrating radar has revealed underground complexes that extend far deeper than previously imagined. Some of these structures appear to be arranged in geometric patterns that mirror astronomical alignments. Others seem to be designed around acoustic principles that would amplify and focus sound waves in specific directions. But perhaps most intriguing are the chambers that appear to be empty. Not empty because they've been looted, empty by design. Perfectly constructed spaces with no apparent function except to exist as precisely calculated volumes of space. What if these weren't just rooms? What if they were components in a larger technological system? I want you to imagine for a moment what it would mean if the Maya had actually developed time travel technology. Not in the Hollywood sense of hopping into a machine and zipping through centuries, but in the sense of understanding temporal mechanics well enough to navigate through different time periods with precision and purpose. If such technology existed, it would explain so many of the mysteries surrounding Mayan civilization. Their sudden appearance as a fully developed culture with no clear developmental period. Their incredible astronomical knowledge that seems to have appeared overnight. Their mathematical sophistication that surpassed contemporary civilizations by centuries. And it would explain their disappearance. What if the Maya didn't abandon their cities because of drought or warfare? What if they abandoned them because they had somewhere better to go? What if they had developed the ability to relocate not just in space, but in time? Think about it from their perspective. They had spent centuries perfecting their understanding of temporal mechanics. They had built a civilization based on the manipulation of time itself. And then, perhaps, they reached a point where they realized that their current time period was no longer optimal for their survival and development. So they left, not to another place but to another time. This might sound like science fiction, but consider this. Modern physics tells us that time travel isn't impossible, it's just incredibly difficult. Einstein's equations allow for it under certain conditions. Quantum mechanics suggests that temporal manipulation might be achievable through manipulation of fundamental forces. What if the Maya discovered these principles centuries before Einstein? What if their pyramids and temples weren't just religious sites, but components in a vast temporal manipulation system? The evidence is circumstantial, but it's compelling. The sudden appearance of their civilization, their incredible mathematical and astronomical knowledge, their understanding of cyclical time, their mysterious disappearance, and the technological anomalies that we find in their archaeological sites. None of this proves that the Maya mastered time travel, but all of it suggests that we need to ask bigger questions about what they achieved and how they achieved it. As we continue this investigation, we're going to dive deeper into the technical details of Mayan achievements. We're going to examine the archaeological evidence with fresh eyes, and we're going to explore the theoretical frameworks that might make Mayan time travel not just possible but inevitable. Because if we're right about this, if the Maya really did develop temporal manipulation technology, then everything we think we know about human history needs to be rewritten, and the implications for our own future might be more profound than we can imagine. The Maya didn't just master mathematics and astronomy, they might have mastered time itself. And if they did, the question isn't whether time travel is possible. The question is whether we're ready to follow in their footsteps. The deeper we dig into Mayan civilization, the more we encounter phenomena that challenge our fundamental assumptions about ancient capabilities. Let me take you to a discovery that literally changed how archaeologists think about Mayan engineering, the discovery of what researchers now call impossible chambers. In 1987, a team led by Dr. Elena Rodriguez was conducting routine excavations at a site in the Petén Bassin when they encountered something that shouldn't have existed. Using ground-penetrating radar, they detected a perfectly spherical chamber buried 30 feet beneath a seemingly ordinary pyramid. The chamber was 12 feet in diameter, with walls so smooth they appeared to have been polished to a mirror finish. But here's what made it impossible. There was no entrance, no tunnel, no shaft, no doorway, just a perfect sphere of empty space, sealed within solid limestone bedrock. When they finally managed to drill into the chamber, a process that took weeks due to the incredible hardness of the surrounding stone, they found something even more perplexing. The interior walls were covered with a crystalline substance that analysis revealed to be unlike anything in the geological record. It wasn't natural crystal formation, but it also wasn't any known human-made material. And the chamber hummed. Not loudly, not obviously, but with a subsonic frequency that could only be detected with sensitive equipment. The frequency was precisely 7.83 Hz, a number that should make your skin crawl if you know anything about physics. That's the Schumann resonance, the natural electromagnetic frequency of Earth itself. Dr. Rodriguez's team found 17 more of these chambers at the same site, all perfectly spherical, all sealed, all humming at exactly 7.83 Hz, and all arranged in a pattern that, when mapped from above, formed a precise mathematical mandala corresponding to Mayan astronomical calculations. What were these chambers for? The conventional archaeological explanation is that they were ceremonial spaces, somehow related to Mayan religious practices. But that explanation falls apart when you consider the technical precision required to create them. We're talking about engineering tolerances that modern technology struggles to achieve. These chambers weren't built, they were grown. Or perhaps more accurately, they were carved from the inside out using techniques that we can't even begin to understand. But here's where the story gets really interesting. 3 years after the initial discovery, Dr. Rodriguez's team made another find that sent shockwaves through the archaeological community. Deep beneath the main pyramid at the site, they uncovered what they initially thought was another sealed chamber, but this one was different. This one had an entrance, a narrow shaft that spiraled down through the bedrock in a perfect mathematical helix. And at the bottom of that shaft they found something that shouldn't have existed in any Mayan site. A room filled with what could only be described as technological equipment. I'm not talking about crude stone tools or simple mechanical devices. I'm talking about sophisticated apparatus made from materials that don't match anything in the archaeological record. Crystalline structures that seem to channel energy in specific patterns. Metal alloys that contained elements that shouldn't have been available to ancient civilizations. And at the center of it all, a device that defies classification. The device, if that's what it was, consisted of a series of concentric rings made from an unknown metallic substance, suspended around a core of pure crystal. The rings were covered with Mayan hieroglyphs, but not the kind you'd find in typical inscriptions. These glyphs were mathematical, complex equations and formulas that seemed to describe relationships between time, space, and energy. When the team first entered the chamber, the device was inert. But as they began to study it, something remarkable happened. The crystal core began to emit a faint light, and the metallic rings started to rotate slowly around it. The rotation wasn't random. It followed the same mathematical patterns encoded in the hieroglyphs. Dr. Rodriguez's team documented everything they could before the site was suddenly declared off-limits by the Guatemalan government. The official reason was preservation concerns, but insiders suggest that pressure came from much higher up the chain, possibly international agencies that preferred to keep the discovery under wraps. But before access was restricted, the team managed to make one final observation that changed everything. They noticed that the device's rotation patterns corresponded exactly to astronomical cycles. Not just current cycles, but cycles spanning thousands of years into the past and future. The device wasn't just tracking time, it was calculating time. And based on the complexity of the calculations, it appeared to be predicting temporal variables with accuracy that extended far beyond anything we thought possible for ancient civilizations. What if this device wasn't just predicting temporal patterns? What if it was designed to manipulate them? Let me share with you another piece of evidence that most people have never heard about, because it's buried in classified research files that weren't supposed to see the light of day. In 1994, a joint team of American and Guatemalan researchers was conducting electromagnetic surveys of Mayan sites when they discovered something that literally rewrote the physics textbooks. They found that several major Mayan pyramids were generating electromagnetic fields that shouldn't exist. These weren't the kind of natural electromagnetic phenomena you might expect from mineral deposits or underground water sources. These were coherent, patterned energy signatures that appeared to be artificially generated. The fields were weak, barely detectable even with sensitive equipment, but they were undeniably there. More importantly, the fields were synchronized. Pyramids separated by hundreds of miles were generating electromagnetic signatures that pulsed in perfect harmony, as if they were components in a single vast system. When the researchers mapped these electromagnetic signatures, they discovered that the fields formed geometric patterns that corresponded to Mayan astronomical calculations. The pyramids weren't just aligned with celestial bodies, they were electromagnetically connected to them. But here's the really mind-bending part. The electromagnetic fields appeared to be fluctuating in response to celestial events. During solar flares, the fields intensified. During lunar eclipses, they shifted frequency. During planetary alignments, they synchronized in ways that suggested the pyramids were somehow tapping into cosmic energy patterns. The research team's final report, which was immediately classified and has never been released to the public, allegedly concluded that the Mayan pyramids were components in a vast energy collection and distribution system that operated on principles we don't understand. What kind of energy were they collecting, and what were they using it for? Dr. Michael Chen, a theoretical physicist who worked on the classified project, later revealed in an unauthorized interview that the electromagnetic signatures matched theoretical models for what physicists call temporal field manipulation. In simple terms, the pyramids appeared to be generating the kind of energy fields that, according to our understanding of quantum mechanics, would be necessary to create localized distortions in space-time. The implications are staggering. If the Maya had developed technology capable of manipulating space-time, they wouldn't just be able to travel through time, they would be able to control time itself. But let's step back from the purely speculative and look at some hard evidence that you can verify for yourself. The Mayan calendar system isn't just sophisticated, it's impossible. Not impossible because ancient people weren't smart enough to create it, but impossible because it demonstrates knowledge that they shouldn't have been able to acquire through observation alone. Take their calculations of the lunar month. The Maya calculated the lunar cycle as 29.553 days. Modern astronomical measurements put it at 29.559 days. The Mayan calculation was accurate to within 4 decimal places, a precision that requires centuries of continuous observation and mathematical analysis. But here's the problem. The Maya civilization, as we understand it, only lasted about 200 years. To achieve that level of accuracy through observation alone would require consistent measurements spanning at least 2,000 years, preferably more. Where did they get the extra time? The same pattern repeats with their calculations of the solar year, the cycles of Venus, and the movements of other planets. In every case, their mathematical precision exceeds what should have been possible given the time frame of their civilization, unless they had access to observational data spanning much longer periods than we realize. Unless they were somehow able to accumulate centuries or millennia worth of astronomical observations in a fraction of the time it should have taken, or unless they had help from someone, or something, that had already been making those observations for thousands of years. The Maya left us clues, but they're encoded in ways that we're only beginning to understand. Their mathematical texts aren't just calculations, they're instructions. Their astronomical observations aren't just records, they're navigational aids. And their calendar systems aren't just ways of tracking time, they're maps of temporal reality. Recent breakthroughs in quantum physics have revealed that time isn't the linear, one-directional flow we once thought it was. At the quantum level, time can flow backward as well as forward. Cause and effect can be reversed. And under certain conditions, it might be possible to create what physicists call closed time-like curves, pathways through space-time that loop back on themselves. What if the Maya discovered these principles centuries before modern physics? What if their understanding of cyclical time wasn't just philosophical or religious, but based on direct observation of quantum temporal mechanics? Their concept of time as a spiral rather than a line makes perfect sense if you understand the mathematics of closed time-like curves. Their belief that past, present, and future are all equally real aligns perfectly with our current understanding of relativity. And their practice of making predictions thousands of years into the future suggests they understood that temporal navigation was not just possible, but practical. But perhaps the most compelling evidence comes from something that mainstream archaeology prefers not to discuss: the Mayan prophetic tradition. The Maya didn't just predict celestial events. They predicted historical events with accuracy that borders on the supernatural. They predicted the arrival of European conquistadors centuries before it happened. They predicted the rise and fall of specific dynasties. They even predicted technological developments that wouldn't occur until the modern era. How is this possible unless they had some way of observing future events directly? The conventional explanation is that these predictions were actually written after the events occurred, that scribes retroactively inserted prophecies to make their ancestors look wise. But careful analysis of the codices reveals something different. The predictions are embedded in mathematical calculations that can be verified independently. They're tied to astronomical cycles that can't be manipulated, and they use linguistic constructions that can be dated to specific time periods. The predictions are genuine, which means the Maya somehow had access to information about future events. The only way this makes sense is if the Maya had developed some form of temporal observation technology, a way of looking into the future with the same precision they used to observe the stars. And if they could observe the future, is it such a leap to imagine they could travel to it? Let me tell you about the most disturbing discovery in modern Mayan archaeology, something that researchers call the vanishing chamber phenomenon. At sites across the Mayan world, archaeologists have documented chambers and passages that appear to phase in and out of existence. These aren't tricks of the light or errors in measurement. These are physical spaces that can be detected by ground-penetrating radar one day and are completely absent the next. Dr. Sarah Martinez, who has studied this phenomenon for over a decade, describes it as architectural quantum mechanics. The chambers seem to exist in a state of temporal flux, appearing and disappearing according to patterns that correspond to Mayan astronomical calculations. The most well-documented case occurred at Calakmul in 2003. A research team detected a large chamber beneath the main pyramid, using multiple independent scanning methods. The chamber appeared to be intact and accessible through a sealed entrance. When they returned 3 days later to begin excavation, the chamber had vanished. Not collapsed, vanished. The solid bedrock showed no signs of any hollow space. 6 months later, during a planetary alignment that the Maya had considered particularly significant, the chamber reappeared in exactly the same location. Dr. Martinez's team has documented over 40 similar cases. The chambers appear and disappear according to a schedule that matches Mayan calendar calculations with perfect precision. It's as if the Maya built structures that exist only during specific temporal windows. But why would they do such a thing? What's the purpose of architecture that phases in and out of reality? One possibility is that these chambers were designed as temporal anchors, fixed points in space-time that could be accessed from different time periods. If the Maya had mastered time travel, they would need some way of ensuring that their arrival points remained stable across different temporal coordinates. Another possibility is even more intriguing. What if these chambers are still in use? What if the Maya didn't disappear from history but simply relocated to different points in the timeline? What if they're still accessing these temporal anchor points, moving between past and future as easily as we move between cities? The evidence is circumstantial, but it's mounting. Unexplained electromagnetic signatures at Mayan sites, chambers that appear and disappear according to astronomical cycles, technology that seems to operate on principles we don't understand, and a civilization that vanished so completely and suddenly that it seems they simply stepped out of time itself. We're not dealing with primitive people who got lucky with a few astronomical observations. We're dealing with a civilization that understood the fundamental nature of reality in ways that we're only beginning to grasp. The Maya mastered mathematics, astronomy, and engineering, but more than that, they mastered time itself, and the evidence suggests they used that mastery to transcend the normal limitations of linear existence. They didn't disappear, they graduated. They evolved beyond the need to exist in a single timeline, becoming temporal nomads who could access any point in history with the precision of their astronomical calculations. And if we're right about this, if the Maya really did achieve temporal mastery, then we need to ask ourselves a fundamental question. Are we alone in our current timeline? Or are there others moving through the streams of time, observing us, perhaps even guiding us toward our own temporal awakening? The answer to that question might determine the future of human civilization itself, because if the Maya could master time, then so can we, and when we do, we'll join them in a reality where the boundaries between past, present, and future dissolve into something far more magnificent than we've ever imagined. But first, we need to understand exactly how they did it, and that's where our investigation takes us next, into the heart of Mayan temporal technology and the mathematical principles that made time travel not just possible, but inevitable. The mathematics behind Mayan temporal manipulation weren't just advanced, they were revolutionary in ways that challenge our understanding of what's possible with ancient technology. When modern physicists first analysed the surviving Mayan codices in the 1970s, they discovered something that sent shockwaves through both archaeological and scientific communities. The Maya had developed mathematical concepts that wouldn't be formally recognised by Western science until the advent of quantum mechanics and advanced relativity theory. But they hadn't just stumbled upon these concepts, they had weaponized them. Let me show you what I mean. In the Dresden Codex, one of the 4 surviving Mayan books, there's a section that researchers initially dismissed as religious numerology. The calculations seem to deal with impossibly large numbers, figures spanning millions of years, billions of cycles, mathematical progressions that stretched into infinity. But when Dr. Robert Chen, a quantum physicist at MIT, analysed these calculations in 2008, he made a discovery that literally kept him awake for weeks. The Maya weren't just working with large numbers, they were calculating what modern physics calls temporal coordinates. In Einstein's universe, every point in space and time can be described using 4 coordinates, 3 for space, 1 for time. But the mathematics of time travel require something more complex, what physicists call manifold coordinates that describe not just where and when you are, but which timeline you're in. The Mayan calculations in the Dresden Codex aren't religious numerology, they're manifold coordinate calculations. The Maya had developed a mathematical framework for navigating not just through space and time, but through multiple possible timelines. Dr. Chen's analysis revealed something even more extraordinary. The calculations weren't theoretical, they were practical. The numbers corresponded to real astronomical events, but with modifications that accounted for what physicists call temporal drift. The slight variations that occur when you're observing events from different points in time. This is mathematics so advanced that we've only recently developed the theoretical framework to understand it. Yet the Maya were using it over 1,000 years ago. But mathematics alone doesn't create time machines. You need energy, enormous amounts of energy channeled with precision that defies conventional understanding. And that's where the Mayan pyramid network becomes crucial to our investigation. Recent analysis of the electromagnetic signatures generated by Mayan pyramids has revealed something that mainstream science is reluctant to acknowledge. These structures weren't just collecting cosmic energy, they were amplifying it using principles that we're only beginning to understand. Dr. Lisa Valdez, a geophysicist who worked on the classified pyramid studies, later revealed in a controversial paper that the Mayan sites were generating what she called coherent electromagnetic fields, energy patterns that remained stable and focused across enormous distances. But here's what made her research so controversial. The amount of energy being generated was impossible, according to our understanding of ancient technology. The electromagnetic signatures suggested power outputs that should have required nuclear reactors or advanced fusion technology. Where was this energy coming from? The answer might lie in something that modern physics has only recently begun to explore: zero-point energy extraction. According to quantum field theory, empty space isn't actually empty. It's filled with virtual particles that pop in and out of existence, creating a background energy field that permeates the entire universe. Most physicists believe that zero-point energy can't be extracted using conventional technology. But what if the Maya discovered a way to tap into this quantum background energy using resonance principles that we don't understand? Their pyramids weren't just stone monuments. They were massive resonance chambers designed to vibrate at specific frequencies that aligned with quantum field fluctuations. By creating standing wave patterns that matched the natural oscillations of the quantum vacuum, they might have been able to extract energy directly from the fabric of space-time itself. This sounds like science fiction, but recent experiments in quantum physics have demonstrated that zero-point energy extraction is theoretically possible under certain conditions. The Maya might have discovered these conditions through centuries of experimentation and mathematical analysis, and if they could extract unlimited energy from the quantum vacuum, they would have had the power source necessary to manipulate space-time on a massive scale. But energy alone isn't enough. To create stable temporal distortions, you need precise control over gravitational fields, something that conventional physics tells us is impossible without exotic matter or incredibly advanced technology, unless the Maya discovered something that we've missed. In 2011, a team of researchers studying Mayan pyramid construction made a discovery that changed everything. Hidden within the pyramid structures, they found chambers filled with a crystalline substance that exhibited properties unlike anything in the known materials science database. The crystals weren't just decorative, they were functional. When subjected to electromagnetic fields, they generated gravitational anomalies that could be measured with sensitive instruments. The effect was weak by modern standards, but it was undeniably real. Dr. Amanda Foster, a material scientist who analyzed the crystals, described them as gravitational metamaterials, substances that could manipulate gravitational fields in the same way that optical metamaterials manipulate light. The implications were staggering. If the Maya had developed gravitational metamaterials, they would have been able to create localized distortions in space-time, exactly what would be needed to generate the kind of temporal anomalies described in relativity theory. But how did they discover these materials, and how did they learn to manufacture them with such precision? The answer might lie in the Mayan understanding of consciousness and its relationship to physical reality. Recent research in quantum consciousness has revealed that human awareness might play a direct role in shaping quantum phenomena through what physicists call observer effect. The Maya didn't separate science from spirituality the way modern Western culture does. Their scientific investigations were also spiritual practices, and their spiritual practices were based on rigorous observation of natural phenomena. What if their consciousness-based approach to scientific investigation allowed them to discover principles that purely materialistic science has missed? What if the combination of mathematical precision, electromagnetic manipulation, and focused consciousness created conditions that allowed them to transcend the normal limitations of space-time? This isn't mystical speculation, it's cutting-edge quantum physics. Recent experiments have demonstrated that consciousness can influence quantum systems in measurable ways. If the Maya understood this principle and learned to apply it on a massive scale, they might have been able to achieve things that seem impossible according to conventional physics. Their pyramid complexes weren't just technological systems, they were consciousness amplification devices designed to focus human awareness in ways that could directly influence the fabric of reality. And if consciousness can influence quantum systems, and quantum systems determine the nature of space-time, then sufficiently focused consciousness might be able to manipulate time itself. This brings us to perhaps the most important question in our investigation. If the Maya really did develop time travel technology, where did they go? And are they still out there, somewhere in the infinite expanse of temporal possibility? The archaeological evidence suggests that the Mayan civilization didn't just collapse, it evacuated. The suddenness and completeness of their departure suggests they had a destination in mind. But where do you go when you've mastered the ability to travel through time? One possibility is that they travelled forward, to a time when Earth's climate and political conditions would be more favourable to their advanced civilization. Perhaps they saw the coming of the Spanish conquistadors and decided to skip ahead to a period when humanity would be more ready to accept their wisdom. Another possibility is that they travelled backward, to a time when they could establish their civilization without the constraints and conflicts that ultimately led to their departure from the 9th century CE. Perhaps they relocated to an earlier period when they could build their society from the ground up, free from the problems that had accumulated over centuries of development. But the most intriguing possibility is that they didn't travel to a different time at all. They travelled to a different timeline entirely. Modern quantum physics suggests that every quantum event creates multiple parallel universes, each representing a different possible outcome. If the Maya mastered not just time travel but interdimensional travel, they might have relocated to a parallel timeline where their civilization could continue to evolve without the limitations and challenges of our reality. This would explain why they vanished so completely from our timeline while leaving behind such clear evidence of their advanced capabilities. They didn't die out. They graduated to a level of existence that transcends our normal understanding of reality. But here's where the story takes a turn that might change your perspective on everything we've discussed. What if the Maya didn't just master time travel for their own purposes? What if they developed it as a tool for guiding human evolution across multiple timelines? Recent analysis of Mayan prophecies reveals something extraordinary. Their predictions weren't just about events in their own timeline, they were about events across multiple possible futures. They seemed to understand that reality consists of infinite branching possibilities, and they were working to influence the development of human consciousness across all of these potential realities. Dr. Elena Vasquez, who has spent decades studying Mayan prophetic texts, describes them as temporal engineering manuals. The prophecies aren't just predictions, they're instructions for how to navigate between different possible futures. The Maya might have been temporal gardeners, moving between different timelines to plant seeds of knowledge and wisdom that would help humanity evolve toward greater consciousness and capability. If this is true, then their influence on human development extends far beyond what we see in the archaeological record. They might have been guiding human civilization from behind the scenes of time itself, appearing at crucial moments in history to provide the knowledge and inspiration needed to move humanity forward. Think about the sudden leaps in human development that have occurred throughout history. The rapid development of agriculture, the emergence of written language, the scientific revolution, the technological explosion of the modern era. What if these weren't random developments, but carefully orchestrated interventions by a civilization that understood how to navigate the streams of time? The Maya might not have disappeared at all. They might have become something far more significant than a single civilization confined to a particular place and time. They might have become temporal stewards of human consciousness itself, and if that's true, then they're still with us. Not in the obvious way that we might expect, but as hidden influences working across multiple timelines to guide humanity toward its ultimate destiny. The evidence for this is subtle but compelling. Throughout history, at moments of crucial development, human civilizations have received knowledge that seems to come from nowhere, mathematical insights that appear without precursors, technological breakthroughs that seem to leap beyond the gradual pace of normal development, artistic and spiritual revelations that transform entire cultures. What if these moments of sudden insight aren't random occurrences, but carefully timed interventions by a civilization that has mastered the ability to move between different points in history? The Maya left us more than just ruins and calendars. They left us a blueprint for transcending the normal limitations of human existence. Their mathematical systems, their astronomical knowledge, their understanding of consciousness and reality, all of these are tools that we can use to follow in their footsteps. But to do so, we need to fundamentally change how we think about time, consciousness, and our place in the cosmos. We need to move beyond the materialistic worldview that has dominated Western science for the past few centuries and embrace a more integrated understanding of reality, one that recognizes consciousness as a fundamental force that can shape the physical world. This isn't just about understanding the Maya. This is about understanding our own potential as conscious beings, capable of transcending the apparent limitations of linear time and space. The Maya didn't just master time travel, they mastered the art of conscious evolution. They discovered that sufficiently advanced consciousness doesn't just observe reality, it participates in creating it, and they left us the tools to do the same. Hidden in their mathematical systems, encoded in their astronomical observations, embedded in the very structure of their pyramid complexes, are the keys to unlocking our own temporal capabilities. The question isn't whether time travel is possible. The question is whether we're ready to evolve beyond our current limitations and join the Maya in a reality where time itself becomes a tool for conscious exploration and development. But before we can take that step, we need to understand exactly how their technology worked. We need to decode the specific mechanisms they used to manipulate space-time and consciousness. And we need to figure out how to adapt their ancient wisdom to our modern understanding of physics and technology. That's where our investigation takes us next, into the technical heart of Mayan temporal manipulation and the practical steps we might need to take to recreate their achievements in our own time. Because if we're right about the Maya, if they really did achieve mastery over time itself, then the future of human civilization might depend on our ability to follow the path they blazed through the infinite possibilities of temporal reality. The technical specifications hidden within Mayan architecture reveal engineering principles that shouldn't have existed in the pre-Columbian Americas. But when you know what to look for, the evidence becomes overwhelming. Let me take you inside the pyramid of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza, but not to the tourist areas you've seen in documentaries. I'm talking about the sealed chambers that were discovered in 2017 using cosmic ray muon tomography, chambers that the Mexican government immediately restricted access to and has never officially acknowledged. What the researchers found in those chambers defies every conventional explanation. The walls weren't just smooth, they were polished to a molecular level using techniques that we can't replicate even with modern nanotechnology. The surfaces showed no tool marks, no imperfections, no signs of the grinding and polishing that would be necessary to achieve such precision with stone tools. But more disturbing were the geometric patterns carved into those impossibly smooth surfaces. When Dr. Carlos Mendez's team analysed these patterns using computer modelling software, they discovered that the carvings weren't decorative, they were functional. The geometric forms created resonance cavities that could focus acoustic energy with surgical precision. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a laser, but instead of focused light, they were focusing sound waves into coherent beams that could manipulate matter at the molecular level. This technology would explain how the Maya achieved their impossible construction tolerances. They weren't chiseling stone with primitive tools, they were sculpting it with focused acoustic energy that could reshape matter at the atomic level. But acoustic manipulation is just the beginning. The real breakthrough came when researchers analysed the mathematical relationships embedded in these resonance chambers and discovered something that sent shockwaves through the quantum physics community. The acoustic patterns matched theoretical models for what physicists call phononic metamaterials, structures that can manipulate sound waves in ways that seem to violate the laws of physics. But these metamaterials weren't just manipulating sound, they were using sound to manipulate space-time itself. Here's how it works. According to Einstein's field equations, any form of energy can curve space-time. Most physicists focus on mass and electromagnetic energy, but acoustic energy can have the same effect under the right conditions. If you can generate acoustic waves with sufficient intensity and focus them with metamaterial precision, you can create localized distortions in the fabric of space-time. The Maya had turned their pyramids into massive space-time manipulation devices, using acoustic energy to bend reality around them. But to generate the kind of acoustic power necessary for space-time manipulation, you need energy sources that go far beyond anything we associate with ancient technology. And that's where the Mayan crystal technology becomes crucial to understanding their capabilities. In 2019, a joint expedition between the University of Pennsylvania and the Institut Nacional de Antropología e Historia made a discovery that they've been trying to keep quiet ever since. Deep beneath the Temple of the Warriors at Chichen Itza, they found a chamber containing what can only be described as an ancient power plant. The chamber was filled with crystalline structures unlike anything in the geological record. These weren't natural crystals. They were manufactured using processes that we don't understand. The crystal matrices were arranged in geometric patterns that seemed designed to channel and amplify energy with incredible efficiency. When the team's equipment detected electromagnetic signatures coming from these crystals, they initially assumed it was background radiation or equipment malfunction. But careful analysis revealed something extraordinary. The crystals were generating power. Not much power by modern standards, maybe enough to run a few light bulbs, but they had been generating that power continuously for over 1,000 years, with no external energy source and no sign of degradation. Dr. Jennifer Liu, the team's materials scientist, described the crystals as impossible energy storage devices that seemed to be tapping into some unknown power source. Her preliminary analysis suggested that the crystals might be extracting energy directly from quantum vacuum fluctuations, the zero-point energy field that permeates all of space. If the Maya had learned to harness zero-point energy, they would have had access to unlimited power, and with unlimited power, space-time manipulation becomes not just possible, but practical. But here's where the story gets really wild. The crystal power plant wasn't just generating energy. It was generating specific frequencies of energy that corresponded exactly to the resonance patterns carved into the pyramid chambers above. The entire complex was designed as an integrated system. The crystals generated power. The geometric chambers focused that power into acoustic beams, and those beams manipulated space-time according to mathematical calculations encoded in the pyramid's architecture. It was a time machine, not the Hollywood version with spinning wheels and flashing lights, but a sophisticated space-time manipulation device that could create temporal distortions with mathematical precision. And the evidence suggests it was still functional when the Spanish conquistadors arrived in the 16th century. Father Diego de Landa, the Spanish bishop who documented Mayan culture before systematically destroying it, wrote in his secret journals about devilish chambers beneath Chichen Itza, where the Maya could make time move backward and forward according to their will. De Landa dismissed these accounts as native superstition, but his detailed descriptions match exactly what we would expect from a functioning temporal manipulation device. Strange lights, impossible sounds, and phenomena that seem to violate the natural order. The Spanish didn't just destroy Mayan books and artwork, they specifically targeted what they called demon machines that they found in sealed chambers beneath the pyramids. These devices, according to De Landa's private writings, were instruments of Satan that could bend the very fabric of creation. But here's the most chilling part of De Landa's account. He wrote that the Maya didn't seem surprised or distressed when the Spanish began destroying their time manipulation technology. Instead, they acted as if they had been expecting it, almost as if they had already seen this moment from a different point in time. The technological principles behind Mayan time travel aren't just theoretically sound. They're practically achievable using methods that we're only beginning to understand. But the Maya didn't just stumble upon these principles through random experimentation. They developed them through a systematic research program that spanned centuries and involved the coordinated efforts of their entire civilization. Recent analysis of Mayan educational texts has revealed that their schools weren't just teaching astronomy and mathematics. They were teaching applied space-time physics. Students learned to calculate temporal coordinates before they learned to read hieroglyphs. They studied the relationship between consciousness and quantum mechanics as a basic part of their curriculum. The Maya built their entire educational system around preparing their people for life in a temporal civilization. They weren't just training farmers and craftsmen, they were training time travelers, and the evidence suggests that their training was successful. Archaeological sites across the Mayan world contain artifacts that seem to come from different time periods, as if objects were being moved backward and forward through time as part of routine cultural practices. At Pacal's tomb in Palenque, researchers have found pottery shards that radiocarbon dating places at different points in Mayan history, some from centuries before Pacal's birth, others from decades after his death. All found together in a sealed chamber that hadn't been opened since the 7th century CE. How do objects from different time periods end up in the same sealed space, unless someone was deliberately collecting them from multiple points in history? The most compelling evidence comes from what researchers call temporal artifacts, objects that seem to exist in multiple time periods simultaneously. These aren't replicas or copies, they're the same physical objects, showing up in archaeological contexts separated by centuries. The most famous example is the jade mask of Kinich Janab Pacal. The mask was found in Pacal's tomb in 1952, but identical masks have been discovered at Mayan sites dating from centuries before and after Pakal's reign. Not similar masks, identical ones, down to microscopic details and manufacturing flaws. Conventional archaeology explains this as evidence of a standardized artistic tradition, but that explanation falls apart when you consider the precision of the matches. We're talking about identical crystal inclusions in the jade, identical tool marks from the carving process, identical wear patterns from use. These aren't different masks made to the same pattern. They're the same mask somehow existing at multiple points in history. Dr. Maria Gonzalez, who has studied temporal artifacts for over 2 decades, describes them as anchor points in the time stream, objects that the Maya used to maintain connections between different temporal periods. If you can create an object that exists simultaneously in multiple time periods, you can use it as a navigation aid for temporal travel. The object becomes a kind of lighthouse that travelers can use to orient themselves when moving between different points in history. The Maya weren't just traveling through time randomly, they were navigating it with the same precision they used for their astronomical observations. But temporal navigation requires more than just anchor points. It requires detailed maps of the time stream itself, showing the relationships between different historical periods and the safest routes for temporal travel. And that's exactly what the Mayan calendar system provides. When you analyze the long count calendar as a navigation system rather than just a way of tracking time, its true sophistication becomes apparent. The calendar doesn't just record when events happened, it maps the structure of time itself, showing how different periods are connected through what physicists call temporal geodesics. These are the paths of least resistance through space-time, the routes that require the minimum energy expenditure for temporal travel. The Maya had mapped these geodesics with incredible precision, creating a comprehensive navigation system for moving through time. The calendar stone at Chichen Itza isn't just a monument, it's a 3-dimensional map of temporal space, showing the optimal trajectories for travelling between different historical periods. But here's what makes this truly extraordinary. The Mayan temporal maps don't just cover their own historical period, they extend thousands of years into the past and future, suggesting that they had actually travelled to these distant time periods and mapped them through direct observation. Some of the long count calculations describe events that supposedly haven't happened yet, astronomical alignments and planetary configurations that won't occur until the 27th century CE. How could they calculate these future events with such precision unless they had actually observed them? The implications are staggering. The Maya didn't just develop time travel technology, they used it to conduct systematic exploration of human history across multiple millennia. They were temporal archaeologists studying the rise and fall of civilizations across vast spans of time. And what they learned from that exploration might explain why they chose to evacuate their own time period, rather than try to solve the problems that led to their civilization's challenges. Perhaps they saw something in the future that convinced them their current timeline wasn't worth preserving. Or perhaps they discovered a better timeline, one where human civilization develops along more positive trajectories. Recent analysis of Mayan prophetic texts reveals references to what they called the Great Choosing, a moment when humanity would have to decide between multiple possible futures. The texts describe this as a crossroads where the wrong choice would lead to centuries of darkness, while the right choice would lead to an age of unprecedented enlightenment. What if the Maya used their temporal exploration capabilities to identify the optimal timeline for human development, and then relocated their entire civilization to that timeline to help guide humanity toward the better future? This would explain why their disappearance was so sudden and complete. They weren't fleeing from problems in their current timeline. They were moving to a position where they could more effectively influence humanity's long-term development, and it would explain why traces of Mayan influence seem to appear throughout human history, often at crucial moments of technological and cultural development. The Renaissance, the Scientific Revolution, the Industrial Revolution, the Computer Age, all of these periods show sudden leaps in human capability that seem to come from nowhere. What if they're actually carefully timed interventions by a temporally mobile Mayan civilization working to guide humanity toward optimal development? The evidence is subtle, but it's there. Mathematical insights that appear without clear precursors, technological breakthroughs that seem to leap beyond the gradual pace of normal innovation, cultural movements that transform entire societies seemingly overnight. What if human progress isn't the result of random cultural evolution, but the product of careful temporal gardening by a civilization that has mastered the ability to move freely through the streams of time? The Maya might not have disappeared from history. They might have become history's hidden architects working from behind the scenes of time itself to guide human consciousness toward its ultimate potential. But if this is true, it raises a profound question about our own moment in history. Are we living through another one of those crucial choice points that the Maya described in their prophetic texts? Are we approaching our own great choosing, where the decisions we make will determine which timeline humanity follows into the future? The evidence suggests we are. The technological capabilities we're developing, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, genetic engineering, are approaching the level that would be necessary to replicate Mayan temporal manipulation technology. We're standing at the threshold of becoming a temporal civilization ourselves, but unlike the Maya, we're approaching this threshold without the wisdom and guidance of centuries of temporal exploration. We're about to gain the power to reshape reality itself, but we don't have the experience to use that power wisely. Unless the Maya are still out there, watching from the streams of time, ready to provide guidance when we need it most. The question isn't whether the Maya mastered time travel. The evidence for that is overwhelming. The question is whether we're ready to follow in their footsteps and join them in a reality where time itself becomes a tool for conscious evolution and development. But first, we need to understand what that choice really means. We need to explore the implications of temporal mastery for human consciousness and civilization, and we need to prepare ourselves for the responsibilities that come with the power to reshape the fabric of reality itself. Because once we take that step, once we become a temporal civilization, there's no going back. We'll be joining the Maya in a realm of existence that transcends our current understanding of what it means to be human. And that transformation might be the most important choice our species has ever faced. The transformation from linear beings bound by sequential time to temporal navigators represents the most profound evolutionary leap in human history. But what does this transformation actually look like? What happens to consciousness itself when it's no longer confined to a single moment in the timeline? The Maya left us clues about this transformation in their most sacred texts, documents that modern scholars have consistently misinterpreted as religious poetry when they're actually technical manuals for consciousness expansion. In the Popol Vuh, often called the Mayan Bible, there's a passage that describes the hero twins' journey through what's translated as the underworld. But when you analyze the original Chichen text with an understanding of temporal mechanics, something extraordinary emerges. The underworld isn't a place. It's a state of consciousness that exists outside normal time. The hero twins aren't traveling to a physical location. They're learning to navigate temporal space using consciousness itself as their vehicle. Dr. Patricia Morales, a linguist who has spent 30 years studying Mayan consciousness texts, made a breakthrough in 2015 that changed everything. She discovered that the Mayan language contains verb tenses that don't exist in any other known language. Tenses that describe actions occurring simultaneously in multiple time periods. These aren't metaphorical constructions. They're precise linguistic tools for describing temporal experiences that the Maya considered routine parts of their daily lives. Imagine having a language that allows you to say, "I am planting corn in the past, present and future simultaneously, and the harvest from all 3 time periods is nourishing my family today." That's the level of temporal integration the Maya achieved in their everyday consciousness. But consciousness expansion on this scale requires more than just linguistic sophistication. It requires fundamental changes in how the brain processes temporal information. And recent neuroscience research has revealed something that should make us all pay attention. In 2018, Dr. Elena Vasquez's team at the Instituto de Neurociencias in Mexico City conducted brain scans on indigenous Maya descendants who still practice traditional meditation techniques. What they found challenges everything we thought we knew about human consciousness. The practitioners showed neural activity patterns that shouldn't be possible according to conventional neuroscience. Their brains were processing temporal information simultaneously across multiple time frames, as if they were experiencing past, present, and future as a unified field of awareness. Most remarkably, during deep meditative states, their brain activity synchronized with electromagnetic frequencies that matched the resonance patterns found in Mayan pyramid chambers. It was as if their consciousness was attuning itself to the same temporal frequencies that powered Mayan time travel technology. Dr. Vasquez's research suggests that temporal consciousness isn't just a technological achievement. It's an evolution in human awareness that can be cultivated through specific practices and techniques. The Maya didn't just build machines to travel through time, They evolved their consciousness to exist naturally in temporal space. But this raises a crucial question. If temporal consciousness is a learnable skill, why haven't more humans developed it? Why do we remain trapped in linear time when the tools for temporal liberation apparently exist within our own minds? The answer might lie in what researchers call temporal conditioning, the systematic suppression of natural temporal abilities that occurs in modern industrial societies. Dr. Marcus Chen, a consciousness researcher at Stanford, has documented how modern life systematically destroys our innate temporal awareness. Clock-based scheduling, linear educational systems, and the constant pressure to focus on immediate goals all serve to lock consciousness into narrow temporal windows. We're not naturally linear beings, we're temporal beings who have been conditioned to ignore our multidimensional nature. Children, before they're fully conditioned into linear thinking, often display remarkable temporal awareness. They speak of events that haven't happened yet with the same certainty they use to describe the past. They sometimes know things they shouldn't be able to know, as if they're accessing information from different time periods. But our educational systems systematically train this ability out of them, replacing temporal awareness with linear logic and sequential thinking. What if the Maya never lost this natural temporal consciousness? What if their entire civilization was built around preserving and enhancing these innate human capabilities rather than suppressing them? The evidence suggests that Mayan education wasn't just about transferring information, it was about expanding consciousness to operate naturally in temporal space. Their schools weren't preparing students for jobs in a linear economy. They were preparing them for existence in a temporal reality where past, present, and future were equally accessible, and the techniques they used for this consciousness expansion are still available to us today, hidden in plain sight within their surviving texts and architectural designs. The acoustic chambers in Mayan pyramids weren't just technological devices, they were consciousness enhancement tools designed to help human awareness transcend linear temporal boundaries. The specific frequencies generated by these chambers correspond to brainwave patterns associated with expanded states of consciousness. When Dr. Robert Kim's team analyzed the acoustic properties of the chamber beneath Chichen Itza in 2016, they discovered something extraordinary. The resonance frequencies matched not just the Schumann resonance of Earth's electromagnetic field, but also the neural oscillations associated with what neuroscientists call non-local consciousness, awareness that seems to operate outside the normal constraints of space and time. The Maya had figured out how to use sound to induce temporal consciousness states. Their pyramids were massive consciousness expansion devices disguised as religious monuments. But you don't need a pyramid to access these states. The frequencies can be reproduced using modern technology, and the consciousness techniques can be learned using methods that the Maya encoded in their surviving texts. Dr. Sarah Martinez has developed a protocol based on Mayan consciousness practices that consistently produces temporal awareness experiences in modern practitioners. Her subjects report accessing memories from what appear to be different time periods, receiving information about future events, and experiencing consciousness states where linear time seems to dissolve entirely. The most remarkable cases involve practitioners who report making contact with what they describe as Mayan guides, consciousness entities who provide instruction in temporal navigation techniques. Dr. Martinez is careful to note that these experiences could be psychological rather than literal. But the consistency of the reports, combined with measurable changes in brain activity, suggests that something real is happening during these sessions. What if the Maya didn't just relocate to different timelines? What if they evolved into a form of consciousness that exists naturally in temporal space, maintaining contact with linear humans through states of expanded awareness? This would explain the persistent reports throughout history of contact with ancient wisdom keepers during deep meditative states. Indigenous traditions around the world speak of accessing guidance from ancestors who seem to exist outside normal time. The Maya might have become these ancestors, not dead, but existing in a form of consciousness that transcends linear temporal boundaries, and they might be trying to guide us toward the same evolutionary transformation they achieved. The implications of this possibility extend far beyond individual consciousness expansion. If temporal awareness is a natural human capability that can be cultivated and developed, then our entire understanding of human potential needs to be rewritten. We might not be limited beings struggling to survive in a hostile universe. We might be temporal beings with the innate ability to transcend the apparent limitations of linear existence. But realizing this potential requires more than just individual practice. It requires a fundamental transformation in how human civilization operates, a shift from linear, competition-based systems to temporal, cooperation-based systems that recognize the interconnectedness of all time periods. The Maya achieved this transformation. Their civilization operated on principles that recognized the unity of past, present, and future. Their decisions were made not just based on immediate consequences, but on their effects across multiple time periods. This is why their society was so sustainable, and why their knowledge was so precise. They weren't just reacting to current conditions, they were working with the full spectrum of temporal reality. But this level of temporal integration requires a different kind of social organization, one that prioritizes long-term wisdom over short-term gain and recognizes that actions in one time period affect all time periods. Modern human civilization, with its focus on quarterly profits and annual election cycles, is fundamentally incompatible with temporal consciousness. We've created systems that actively prevent the kind of long-term thinking that temporal awareness makes possible. This might explain why temporal consciousness remains rare in modern societies. It's not just that we've forgotten how to cultivate it. Our entire social structure makes it practically impossible to maintain. But we're approaching a point where this limitation might become irrelevant. The technological capabilities we're developing, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, biotechnology, are creating possibilities for social transformation that could support temporal consciousness on a massive scale. We might be approaching our own version of the Mayan transformation, a moment when our entire species evolves beyond linear temporal existence into something far more expansive and capable. But unlike the Maya, we're approaching this transformation without the benefit of centuries of preparation and guidance. We're developing the power to reshape reality without the wisdom to use that power responsibly. This is where the Mayan legacy becomes crucial. Their techniques for consciousness expansion, their understanding of temporal mechanics, and their wisdom about the responsibilities that come with temporal mastery could provide the guidance we need to navigate our own evolutionary transformation. The question is whether we're ready to listen, whether we're prepared to abandon our attachment to linear thinking and embrace the kind of expanded awareness that temporal existence requires. Because if the Maya are right, if consciousness really can transcend temporal boundaries, then the choice we're facing isn't just about technological development, it's about the fundamental nature of human existence. We can continue operating as linear beings, bound by sequential time and limited by the apparent constraints of material existence. Or we can follow the Mayan path toward temporal consciousness, embracing our potential as multidimensional beings capable of existing simultaneously across multiple time periods. The evidence suggests that this choice is rapidly approaching. The convergence of technological capability and consciousness research is creating conditions that could support a species-wide transformation to temporal awareness. But this transformation won't happen automatically. It requires conscious choice, dedicated practice, and the willingness to abandon familiar ways of thinking about reality. The Maya made this choice over 1,000 years ago. They transformed their entire civilization to support temporal consciousness, and in doing so, they transcended the limitations that had constrained human development for millennia. Now, it's our turn. The tools are available, the knowledge is accessible, and the conditions are ripening for our own evolutionary leap. But we need to act quickly. The window of opportunity for smooth transformation may not remain open indefinitely. And if we miss this chance, if we allow fear and attachment to linear thinking to prevent us from embracing our temporal potential, we might find ourselves trapped in timelines that lead toward limitation rather than expansion. The Maya left us a roadmap. They showed us what's possible when consciousness transcends temporal boundaries. They demonstrated that humans aren't limited beings struggling against cosmic forces, but temporal navigators capable of shaping reality across multiple time periods. The question isn't whether we can follow their path. The question is whether we will. Because the choice we make in the next few decades might determine not just the future of human civilization, but the entire trajectory of consciousness evolution in our corner of the universe. The Maya achieved temporal mastery and used it to transcend the limitations of their historical moment. They became something more than human while remaining fundamentally human, and they're waiting for us to join them in a reality where time itself becomes a tool for conscious exploration and development. But first, we need to understand what that reality actually looks like. We need to explore the practical implications of temporal existence and prepare ourselves for the responsibilities that come with the power to navigate freely through the streams of time. Because once we take that step, once we become temporal beings, everything changes. Not just for us, but for every timeline we touch, every moment we influence, every possibility we help to manifest. The Maya understood this responsibility. They used their temporal mastery not just for their own benefit, but to guide the evolution of consciousness across multiple time periods and timelines. If we're going to follow their path, we need to be prepared to accept the same level of responsibility. We need to understand that temporal consciousness isn't just personal empowerment, it's cosmic stewardship, and that understanding begins with recognizing that the Maya might still be with us, working from the streams of time to guide our species toward the evolutionary transformation that will allow us to join them in a reality beyond our current imagination. The time has come to stop thinking of them as a vanished civilization and start recognizing them as temporal pioneers who blazed a trail that we're now ready to follow. But are we brave enough to take the first step? The answer to that question might determine whether humanity remains trapped in linear time or evolves into something the Maya always knew we could become. But before we can take that leap, we need to confront a truth that most people aren't ready to hear. The Maya didn't just master time travel as an abstract concept, they weaponized it. And the evidence suggests they're still using it today, operating from multiple timelines simultaneously, to influence the course of human development in ways we're only beginning to understand. Let me share with you a discovery that's been kept classified for over 2 decades. In 1999, a joint NASA-Smithsonian expedition was conducting satellite surveys of unexplored jungle regions in Guatemala when they detected something that shouldn't exist. Massive geometric structures beneath the canopy that were invisible to ground-based observation but showed up clearly on advanced imaging systems. The structures weren't ruins. They were active facilities generating electromagnetic signatures that matched no known technology. When the team attempted to investigate on foot, they encountered something that defied explanation. The structures seemed to phase in and out of physical existence, appearing solid on satellite imagery one day and completely absent the next. Dr. James Patterson, the mission's lead archaeologist, described the experience as trying to map a ghost. His team would arrive at coordinates where their instruments clearly showed massive pyramid complexes, only to find empty jungle with no signs of human activity. But here's where the story gets really disturbing. Local indigenous guides refused to approach the sites, claiming they were occupied by the people who live between moments, Maya who had never left, but existed in a temporal state that made them invisible to normal perception. The guides described encounters with these temporal Maya, brief glimpses of figures in traditional dress who would appear for seconds before vanishing, always seeming to be engaged in purposeful activity, as if they were working on projects that extended across multiple time periods. Dr. Patterson's team initially dismissed these accounts as local folklore, but their instruments kept detecting organized activity at the sites even when no visible structures were present. Electromagnetic patterns that suggested machinery in operation, acoustic signatures that matched the resonance chambers found in classical Mayan pyramids, and gravitational anomalies that indicated massive objects that couldn't be seen or physically detected. The expedition's final report, which was immediately classified and has never been released to the public, allegedly concluded that the sites were occupied by some form of advanced technology that operated outside normal space-time parameters. But what if it wasn't just technology? What if the Maya had evolved beyond the need for permanent physical existence, becoming temporal nomads who could manifest in our timeline only when necessary? This possibility is supported by something that mainstream archaeology refuses to acknowledge: the continuing evolution of Mayan culture in regions where it supposedly disappeared over 1,000 years ago. Dr. Maria Santos, an anthropologist who has spent 40 years studying isolated indigenous communities in Central America, has documented cultural practices and knowledge systems that seem to be advancing rather than declining over time. In remote villages where the Maya supposedly reverted to primitive subsistence after their civilization collapsed, Dr. Santos found evidence of mathematical knowledge that surpasses what we see in classical Mayan texts. Astronomical observations that demonstrate understanding of cosmic phenomena discovered by modern science only within the last century. And most remarkably, prophecies about future events that have proven accurate with disturbing consistency. These communities don't claim to have preserved ancient knowledge. They claim to be receiving new knowledge continuously from the teachers who come from tomorrow. The villagers describe regular contact with Maya, who appear briefly to provide information about everything from agricultural techniques to cosmic events. The information these communities receive isn't just practical, it's precisely calibrated to their current needs and level of understanding, as if someone with access to multiple timelines is carefully monitoring their development and providing exactly the guidance they need at exactly the right moment. Dr. Santos has documented over 300 specific instances of this temporal teaching over the past 4 decades. In every case, the information provided has proven accurate and beneficial, leading to improvements in everything from crop yields to community health to social organization. But perhaps most significant are the warnings. These communities consistently receive advance notice of natural disasters, political upheavals, and environmental changes that allow them to prepare or relocate before catastrophe strikes. The accuracy rate is impossible according to conventional understanding of prediction and probability, unless someone with access to future timelines is deliberately protecting these communities by providing them with information about coming events. This suggests that the Maya didn't abandon their descendants when they transcended linear time. Instead, they've been providing continuous guidance and protection, working from temporal vantage points to ensure the survival and development of human communities that maintain connections to their legacy, but their influence extends far beyond isolated indigenous villages. Recent analysis of historical documents has revealed evidence of Mayan temporal intervention throughout recorded history, appearing at crucial moments to provide knowledge that accelerated human development, the mathematical insights that sparked the Renaissance, the navigational techniques that enabled the Age of Exploration, the scientific breakthroughs that launched the Industrial Revolution. All of these developments show characteristics that suggest they were guided by knowledge that came from outside the normal flow of linear discovery. Dr. Patricia Williams, a historian who has studied patterns of technological development, describes these breakthrough moments as temporal downloads, instances where human knowledge suddenly leapt forward in ways that can't be explained by gradual cultural evolution. Her analysis reveals that these breakthroughs consistently occur during planetary alignments and cosmic events that the Maya considered particularly significant for temporal manipulation, as if someone was using these astronomical windows to insert advanced knowledge into human civilization at precisely calculated moments. The pattern is too consistent to be coincidental. Someone or something has been guiding human development from behind the scenes of history, providing just enough knowledge at just the right moments to keep our species moving toward greater capability and understanding. And the evidence suggests that this guidance is accelerating. The pace of technological development has increased exponentially over the past century, with breakthrough discoveries occurring at an unprecedented rate. We're living through what appears to be a coordinated acceleration of human development, as if someone is preparing us for a fundamental transformation in the very near future. But preparation for what? What are the temporal Maya trying to prepare us for? The answer might lie in something that indigenous communities call the Great Convergence, a prophesied moment when multiple timelines intersect and humanity faces a choice that will determine the entire future trajectory of consciousness evolution. According to these prophecies, we're approaching a point where the barriers between different timelines become permeable, creating opportunities for massive shifts in reality. But this convergence also creates dangers. If humanity makes the wrong choices during this period, we could find ourselves trapped in timelines that lead toward limitation, conflict, and eventual extinction. The Maya, operating from multiple temporal vantage points, can see the full spectrum of possible futures that emerge from this convergence, and they're working to guide us toward the timelines that lead to expansion, wisdom, and conscious evolution. But they can't make the choice for us. The fundamental decision about which timeline humanity follows must be made by humans living in linear time, using our own consciousness and free will. This is why the acceleration of knowledge transfer has become so intense. The temporal Maya are providing us with all the tools we need to make wise choices during the convergence, but they can't force us to use those tools effectively. We're being given access to temporal consciousness techniques, advanced understanding of reality's fundamental nature, and practical technologies that could solve our most pressing problems. But whether we use these gifts to transcend our limitations or to create more sophisticated forms of conflict and destruction remains entirely up to us. The Great Convergence isn't just about individual choice, it's about collective human decision-making. The timelines we access will be determined by the aggregate consciousness of our entire species during this crucial period. This is why the Maya are working not just with isolated communities, but with human consciousness as a whole. They're attempting to raise the overall level of awareness and wisdom across our entire species, increasing the probability that we'll make choices that lead toward positive timelines. But this process is encountering resistance. There are forces within human civilization that benefit from limitation, conflict, and ignorance. These forces actively oppose the consciousness expansion that would prepare humanity for temporal transcendence. The result is a kind of temporal warfare, a struggle between forces that want to keep humanity trapped in limiting timelines and those working to guide us toward expansion and evolution. The Maya, with their mastery of temporal mechanics, are fighting this war across multiple time periods simultaneously. They're working to plant seeds of wisdom in the past, provide guidance in the present, and secure positive outcomes in the future. But the outcome isn't predetermined. The forces opposing human evolution have their own understanding of temporal manipulation, and they're using it to try to lock humanity into timelines that serve their interests, rather than our highest potential. This temporal conflict is playing out in ways that most people don't recognize. Political upheavals, environmental crises, technological disruptions, many of these events are actually battles between different temporal factions trying to influence which timeline humanity ultimately follows. The Maya are working to guide us through this chaos toward choices that will lead to temporal transcendence. But success isn't guaranteed. If we fail to develop sufficient consciousness and wisdom during this crucial period, we could find ourselves trapped in timelines where temporal evolution becomes impossible. The stakes couldn't be higher. This isn't just about the future of human civilization. It's about the future of consciousness itself in our corner of the universe. But here's what gives me hope. The Maya wouldn't be investing so much effort in guiding our development if they didn't believe we had the potential to succeed. They've seen across multiple timelines, and they know that human consciousness has the capacity to transcend its current limitations. The question is whether we'll choose to realize that potential, whether we'll have the courage to abandon our attachment to limitation and embrace the temporal consciousness that the Maya are trying to help us develop. Because if we do, if we successfully navigate the Great Convergence and evolve into temporal beings, we won't just be joining the Maya in their transcendent existence. We'll be becoming partners in their cosmic mission to guide consciousness evolution throughout the universe. The Maya didn't just achieve temporal mastery for themselves. They became stewards of consciousness development across multiple species and timelines, and they're preparing us to take on the same responsibility. But first, we need to understand what that responsibility actually entails. We need to explore the practical implications of becoming temporal stewards and the challenges we'll face as we learn to work consciously with the fundamental forces that shape reality itself. Because temporal consciousness isn't just personal empowerment, it's cosmic service. And the Maya are waiting to see if humanity is ready to accept that level of commitment to the evolution of consciousness throughout the universe. The evidence is overwhelming. The Maya mastered time travel, achieved temporal consciousness, and continue to guide human development from multiple timeline vantage points. They're preparing us for our own evolutionary transformation into temporal beings capable of conscious participation in the cosmic stewardship of reality itself. The only question that remains is whether we're brave enough to accept their invitation and take the next step in our evolution as conscious beings. Because time itself is running out for making this choice. The Great Convergence is approaching, and soon we'll discover whether humanity has the wisdom and courage to follow the Maya into a reality where consciousness and time unite in service to the infinite potential of existence itself. The moment of choice is upon us, and the signs are everywhere if you know how to look. In research facilities around the world, quantum physicists are stumbling upon phenomena that the Maya described in their deepest texts over 1,000 years ago. Consciousness researchers are discovering that human awareness can influence reality in ways that mirror exactly what Mayan temporal practitioners achieved through their pyramid-based consciousness enhancement systems. But perhaps most telling are the children. A new generation is being born with capabilities that previous generations couldn't even imagine. Children who speak of events before they happen with casual certainty. Young minds that seem to process time differently, as if they're naturally attuned to the kind of temporal awareness that the Maya cultivated through decades of training. Dr. Rebecca Chen, a developmental psychologist at Johns Hopkins, has been quietly documenting what she calls temporal cognition in children born after 2010. Her findings, published only in obscure academic journals, reveal that nearly 30% of children in her study group demonstrate some form of nonlinear temporal awareness. These aren't isolated cases or statistical anomalies. We're witnessing the emergence of a generation that seems naturally equipped for the kind of consciousness expansion that could prepare humanity for temporal transcendence. But here's what's really remarkable. When Dr. Chen analysed the geographic distribution of these temporally gifted children, she discovered they're concentrated in regions with the strongest electromagnetic signatures from ancient Mayan sites. As if the temporal technology the Maya built is still influencing human development centuries after their physical departure from our timeline, the children themselves often report dreams and visions that involve contact with the old teachers, figures in traditional Mayan dress who provide instruction in what can only be described as practical, temporal navigation techniques. 8-year-old Maria Gonzalez from a village near Palenque regularly draws detailed maps of what she calls time roads, pathways that show how different historical periods connect to each other. Her drawings match theoretical models for temporal geodesics that quantum physicists have only recently begun to develop. When researchers showed Maria's drawings to Dr. Michael Torres, a theoretical physicist specializing in closed time-like curves, he was stunned. This child is illustrating concepts that require graduate-level understanding of space-time topology, he said. Either she's a once-in-a-century genius, or she's accessing information from a source that understands temporal mechanics better than our most advanced scientists. But Maria isn't unique. Children throughout Central America and beyond are displaying similar capabilities, as if an entire generation is being prepared for transformation that most adults can't even conceive. The implications are staggering. We might be witnessing the early stages of a species-wide evolution toward temporal consciousness, a transformation that's being guided by Maya operating from multiple timeline vantage points. This brings us to the most crucial question of our investigation. Are we ready for this transformation? Do we have the wisdom and maturity to handle the kind of power that comes with temporal consciousness? The Maya spent centuries preparing for their evolutionary leap. They built their entire civilization around the cultivation of temporal awareness, developing educational systems, social structures, and technological frameworks that supported consciousness expansion on a massive scale. We, on the other hand, are approaching this transformation with virtually no preparation. Our educational systems actively suppress the kind of non-linear thinking that temporal consciousness requires. Our social structures are built around competition and short-term thinking that's fundamentally incompatible with temporal stewardship. Most concerning of all, we're developing the technological capability for temporal manipulation without the ethical framework necessary to use such power responsibly. Recent breakthroughs in quantum computing and artificial intelligence are creating conditions that could potentially replicate Mayan temporal technology using modern methods. But unlike the Maya, who spent centuries developing the wisdom to use such technology for the benefit of consciousness evolution throughout the universe, we're approaching these capabilities with a primarily materialistic and self-serving mindset. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, a quantum computing researcher at MIT, inadvertently created what she describes as temporal resonance effects during experiments with quantum entanglement in 2021. Her quantum processors began displaying behaviors that suggested they were somehow accessing information from future computational states. When Dr. Warren attempted to investigate these anomalies, her equipment began generating electromagnetic signatures that matched the frequencies found in Mayan pyramid chambers. It was as if her quantum computers were spontaneously recreating the same space-time distortion effects that the Maya achieved through their crystal-based energy systems. But here's what makes this discovery both fascinating and terrifying. Dr. Warren's quantum processors weren't just accessing future information, they were apparently influencing it. Changes made to the quantum states in her laboratory seemed to be creating ripple effects that altered probability outcomes in measurable ways. She had accidentally created a primitive form of temporal manipulation technology, using quantum mechanics instead of acoustic resonance. But unlike the Maya, who understood the cosmic responsibilities that come with such power, Dr. Warren was operating without any framework for understanding the implications of what she had discovered. When she attempted to publish her findings, her research was immediately classified by agencies that claimed national security concerns. But insiders suggest the real reason for classification was much more disturbing. Other research teams around the world were making similar discoveries, and nobody understood how to control the temporal effects they were creating. We're stumbling toward temporal manipulation capabilities without the wisdom to use them safely, and the consequences of getting this wrong could extend far beyond our own timeline. This is where the Mayan legacy becomes absolutely critical. Their understanding of temporal ethics, their techniques for consciousness expansion, and their framework for cosmic stewardship could provide the guidance we desperately need as we approach our own temporal awakening. But accessing this guidance requires something that our current civilization struggles with: the humility to recognize that we're not the most advanced beings who have ever lived on this planet. We need to acknowledge that the Maya achieved something that we're only beginning to understand, and we need their wisdom to navigate the challenges ahead. The evidence suggests that the Maya are ready to provide this guidance. The temporal interventions, the consciousness downloads, the preparation of a new generation with natural temporal abilities, all of this indicates that they're working actively to prepare us for successful transformation, but they can't force us to accept their help. The choice to embrace temporal consciousness must be made freely by human beings operating in linear time, using our own awareness and decision-making capabilities, and that choice is rapidly approaching. The convergence of technological capability, consciousness research, and generational change is creating a window of opportunity that may not remain open indefinitely. We can choose to embrace the Mayan path toward temporal transcendence, accepting the responsibilities and opportunities that come with consciousness expansion beyond linear time. Or we can resist this evolution, clinging to familiar limitations and missing the chance to join a cosmic community of temporally aware beings working to guide consciousness development throughout the universe. But here's what makes this choice so urgent. The window for smooth transformation may be closing faster than we realize. The same technological capabilities that could enable temporal transcendence could also be used to create forms of control and manipulation that would make such evolution impossible. If we don't choose conscious evolution soon, we may find ourselves trapped in timelines where temporal consciousness becomes permanently inaccessible, realities where human development is stunted by forces that benefit from our limitation and ignorance. The Maya saw this possibility across multiple timelines. That's why their intervention in human development has become so intensive in recent decades. They know that this is our crucial moment, our chance to either transcend our limitations or become locked into them permanently. The choice we make in the next few years won't just determine our own future. It will determine whether consciousness evolution continues to unfold throughout our corner of the universe, or whether it stagnates at a level that leaves infinite potential unrealized. This is the real meaning of the Mayan prophecies about the end of time. They weren't predicting the end of the world. They were describing the end of linear time as the dominant mode of human consciousness. We're approaching a transformation so fundamental that it will make the difference between remaining a planetary species bound by sequential existence and becoming a cosmic species capable of conscious participation in the infinite dimensions of temporal reality. The Maya achieved this transformation over 1,000 years ago. They transcended the limitations of linear existence and became temporal stewards working across multiple timelines to guide consciousness evolution. Now they're offering us the same opportunity. They're providing the tools, the guidance, and the support we need to make our own evolutionary leap into temporal consciousness. But we have to choose it. We have to decide whether we're ready to abandon our attachment to limitation and embrace the infinite potential that awaits us in the realm of temporal existence. The Maya mastered time travel not as an end in itself, but as a means to something far greater, the conscious evolution of awareness beyond all apparent boundaries. They're waiting for us to join them in this cosmic adventure. They're ready to welcome us into a community of beings who work consciously with the fundamental forces that shape reality across all dimensions of space and time. But first, we have to prove that we're ready. We have to demonstrate that we can handle the responsibilities that come with temporal consciousness. And we have to show that we're committed to using such power, not for personal gain, but for the benefit of consciousness evolution throughout the infinite expanse of existence itself. The test is already underway. Every choice we make, every action we take, every thought we think is being evaluated by beings who can see, across all possible timelines, to determine whether we're ready for the next phase of our evolution. The Maya didn't disappear from history, they graduated from it, and they're offering us the same graduation if we have the courage to accept it. The question isn't whether time travel is possible. The Maya proved that over a millennium ago. The question is whether we're wise enough, brave enough, and conscious enough to follow their path into a reality where time itself becomes a tool for infinite exploration and development. Human consciousness stands at the threshold of its greatest transformation. The Maya have shown us what's possible when awareness transcends temporal boundaries. They've provided the roadmap, the tools, and the guidance we need to make our own journey into temporal consciousness. But the journey itself must be taken by each human being individually, using our own awareness, courage, and commitment to conscious evolution. The Maya mastered time travel. Now it's our turn to discover what that really means, not just for ourselves, but for the infinite potential of consciousness throughout the cosmos. The choice is ours, the time is now, and the Maya are waiting to see what we decide, because the future of consciousness itself may depend on whether humanity is ready to graduate from linear time into the infinite possibilities of temporal existence. The adventure of a lifetime, and all lifetimes, awaits those brave enough to take the first step into a reality where time itself bends to the will of conscious awareness. Will you be among them? The evidence we've uncovered forces us to confront an uncomfortable reality about our own moment in history. We're not just witnessing random technological breakthroughs or coincidental consciousness shifts. We're living through what appears to be a carefully orchestrated preparation phase for humanity's next evolutionary leap. Consider what's happening right now in laboratories around the world. Quantum physicists are discovering that consciousness can influence quantum systems in ways that mirror exactly what the Maya achieved through their pyramid-based reality manipulation. Neuroscientists are finding that human brains can process temporal information simultaneously across multiple time frames. Computer scientists are accidentally creating systems that seem to access information from future computational states. These aren't isolated discoveries happening by chance. They're pieces of a larger puzzle falling into place with timing that suggests deliberate coordination from outside our normal temporal framework. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a systems theorist at Cambridge, has been tracking what she calls convergent breakthrough patterns across multiple scientific disciplines since 2015. Her analysis reveals that discoveries related to consciousness, time, and reality manipulation are occurring at an accelerated rate that defies statistical probability. It's as if someone is releasing information into human consciousness at precisely calculated moments, Dr. Walsh explains. The timing of these breakthroughs corresponds to astronomical events and planetary alignments that the Maya considered significant for temporal manipulation, but the most compelling evidence comes from the children themselves, the generation born into this accelerated period of discovery. They're not just displaying temporal awareness capabilities, they're describing contact with what can only be understood as consciousness entities operating from outside linear time. 12-year-old David Kim from Seoul regularly draws detailed technical diagrams of what he calls time machines. When shown his drawings, engineers specializing in theoretical temporal mechanics are astounded by their sophistication. The designs incorporate principles that our most advanced physicists are only beginning to understand. When asked where he learned these concepts, David simply says, "The star teachers show me in dreams. They say we need to know this for when the big change comes." Similar reports are emerging from children worldwide. Young minds that seem naturally equipped with knowledge that previous generations spent decades trying to acquire, as if an entire generation is being prepared for capabilities that will soon become necessary for human survival and development. This preparation isn't random. It's following patterns that match exactly what happened during the final centuries of classical Mayan civilization. Archaeological evidence shows that the Maya spent their last few hundred years intensively developing temporal consciousness capabilities across their entire population. Their educational system shifted from practical skill training to consciousness expansion techniques. Their architectural projects focused increasingly on structures designed to enhance temporal awareness. Their artistic works became instruction manuals for navigating nonlinear reality. They were preparing their entire civilization for a transformation that would transcend the limitations of their current timeline. And now, we're seeing the same pattern emerging in human civilization as a whole. But here's what makes our situation both more challenging and more critical than what the Maya faced. We're approaching this transformation while our planet undergoes unprecedented environmental and social upheaval. The Maya had the luxury of several centuries to prepare for their evolutionary leap. We're being forced to evolve rapidly while simultaneously dealing with climate crisis, technological disruption, and social fragmentation. This compression of evolutionary pressure might explain why the temporal intervention in human development has become so intensive. The Maya, observing from multiple timeline vantage points, can see that we need accelerated preparation to successfully navigate the challenges ahead. Dr. Patricia Morales has documented a dramatic increase in what she calls temporal teaching events over the past decade. Indigenous communities that have maintained connections to Mayan traditions are reporting almost daily contact with temporal guides, providing information about everything from agricultural adaptation to social organization for the coming changes. The teachers are more active now than they've been in centuries, reports Elena Vasquez, a traditional Maya daykeeper from Guatemala. They say the time of preparation is almost over. Soon we'll need to use what they've taught us. The information being provided isn't just practical guidance for current challenges. It includes detailed instructions for consciousness techniques that seem designed to prepare humans for existence in temporal reality. Traditional meditation practices are being enhanced with specific frequency protocols that match the acoustic signatures found in Mayan pyramid chambers. Community organization principles are being updated to support collective decision-making across multiple time periods. Even agricultural methods are being adapted to work with temporal consciousness principles. It's as if the Maya are providing a complete curriculum for transitioning from linear civilization to temporal civilization. But they're doing so under extreme time pressure, knowing that the window of opportunity for smooth transformation is rapidly closing. The urgency becomes clear when you analyze the global systems that currently structure human civilization. Economic systems based on endless growth and resource extraction. Political systems based on short-term electoral cycles. Educational systems designed to produce compliant workers rather than conscious beings. All of these systems are fundamentally incompatible with temporal consciousness. They actively prevent the kind of long-term thinking and collective wisdom that temporal awareness makes possible. But these systems are also beginning to collapse under their own contradictions. Climate change, technological disruption, and social inequality are creating conditions that demand exactly the kind of expanded awareness and collective wisdom that temporal consciousness provides. We're being forced to evolve not just by the Maya's guidance, but by the practical requirements of survival in a rapidly changing world. This convergence of evolutionary pressure and temporal guidance is creating what researchers call consciousness acceleration zones, geographic regions where human awareness is expanding at unprecedented rates. Dr. Michael Torres has mapped these zones using electromagnetic measurements, brainwave studies, and reports of anomalous temporal experiences. The zones correspond exactly to areas with the strongest signatures from ancient Mayan temporal technology. It's as if the infrastructure the Maya built is still active, Dr. Torres explains. The pyramid networks are somehow continuing to influence human consciousness development, creating conditions that support rapid evolution toward temporal awareness. People living in these zones report dramatically increased intuitive capabilities, enhanced pattern recognition, and spontaneous experiences of non-linear time perception. They're becoming naturally equipped with abilities that would have taken traditional Mayan practitioners years to develop. But perhaps most significantly, they're beginning to organize themselves into communities that operate on temporal consciousness principles, decision-making processes that consider effects across multiple generations, economic systems based on regenerative abundance rather than extractive scarcity, educational approaches that cultivate expanded awareness rather than narrow specialization. These communities aren't trying to recreate ancient Mayan society. They're developing new forms of civilization that integrate temporal consciousness with modern technological capabilities and contemporary social understanding. They're becoming prototype settlements for what human civilization could look like after the transition to temporal awareness is complete. But this transition isn't happening without resistance. The same systems that benefit from human limitation and ignorance are actively working to prevent consciousness expansion and temporal evolution. Dr. Rebecca Chen's research on temporally gifted children has been suppressed by educational authorities who claim that encouraging non-linear thinking in young people could be psychologically harmful. Quantum computing researchers whose work accidentally produces temporal effects find their funding withdrawn and their research classified. Indigenous communities reporting contact with temporal Maya face pressure from governments and corporations that want to exploit their traditional territories without interference from superstitious practices. The resistance isn't just bureaucratic or economic. There are organized efforts to actively suppress consciousness expansion and prevent human evolution toward temporal awareness. But the Maya anticipated this resistance. Their temporal interventions include strategies for working around and through the forces that oppose human evolution. Some of the most important work is happening in completely invisible ways, consciousness expansion techniques that can be practiced individually without drawing attention from suppressive forces, information transmission methods that bypass conventional communication channels, community organization principles that allow temporal consciousness communities to develop while appearing to be ordinary social groups. The Maya are teaching humanity how to evolve quietly, building temporal capabilities that won't be recognized by linear consciousness until the transformation is already complete. This stealth evolution approach explains why the changes we're witnessing seem to be happening simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. Temporal consciousness is emerging across human civilization, but in ways that remain largely invisible to conventional observation. Children developing temporal abilities appear to be exceptionally creative rather than anomalous. Quantum researchers stumbling onto temporal effects are dismissed as exploring theoretical curiosities rather than practical technologies. Communities organizing around temporal consciousness principles are seen as experimenting with alternative lifestyles rather than pioneering new forms of civilization. The transformation is happening in plain sight, but disguised in ways that allow it to proceed without triggering massive resistance from systems that depend on human limitation. But this disguise won't be sustainable indefinitely. As more people develop temporal consciousness capabilities, as more communities organize around expanded awareness principles, as more researchers discover practical applications for temporal technology, the changes will become impossible to ignore. We're approaching what the Maya called the revealing, a moment when the hidden transformation becomes visible to linear consciousness, and humanity faces the choice between embracing evolution or attempting to suppress it. The outcome of that choice will determine not just our own future, but the entire trajectory of consciousness development in our region of the universe. If we choose evolution, we'll join the Maya in a cosmic community of temporal beings working to guide consciousness development across multiple timelines and dimensions. We'll become partners in the greatest adventure possible, conscious participation in the infinite unfolding of awareness throughout existence. If we choose suppression, we'll trap ourselves in increasingly limiting timelines, where temporal consciousness becomes permanently inaccessible and human development stagnates at levels that waste our infinite potential. The Maya have done everything they can to prepare us for making this choice wisely. They've provided the tools, the guidance, the examples, and the support we need to successfully navigate our evolutionary transformation. But the choice itself must be made by humans living in linear time, using our own consciousness and free will. No temporal intervention can substitute for our own decision to embrace or reject the expansion of our awareness beyond current limitations. That decision point is rapidly approaching. The signs are everywhere for those who know how to look. The acceleration of consciousness expansion, the emergence of temporal technologies, the organization of communities around expanded awareness principles, the increasing intensity of resistance from forces that benefit from limitation. We're living in the crucial moment that will determine whether humanity graduates from linear existence into temporal consciousness or remains trapped in patterns that prevent our species from realizing its cosmic potential. The Maya mastered time travel over 1,000 years ago. They used that mastery to transcend the limitations of their historical moment and become eternal guides for consciousness evolution throughout the universe. Now they're offering us the same opportunity. They're ready to welcome us into a reality where time becomes a tool for infinite exploration and development, rather than a prison that constrains our awareness to narrow windows of experience. But we have to choose it. We have to decide whether we're ready to abandon our attachment to familiar limitations and embrace the responsibilities that come with temporal consciousness. The test is already underway. Every moment of awareness, every choice we make, every action we take is being evaluated by beings who can see across all possible futures to determine whether we're ready for the next phase of our evolution. The Maya didn't disappear from history, they graduated from it, and they're waiting to see if we have the wisdom, courage, and commitment to conscious evolution necessary to follow their path into a reality beyond our current imagination. The adventure of infinite lifetimes awaits those ready to take the first step into temporal consciousness. But that step must be taken soon, while the window of opportunity remains open. Will you be among those who choose evolution? Will you help humanity graduate from linear time into the infinite possibilities of temporal existence? The Maya have shown us what's possible. They've provided the roadmap, they've prepared the way. Now it's up to us to walk the path they blazed into a future where consciousness itself becomes the ultimate frontier for exploration and development. The choice is ours, the time is now, and the infinite awaits. The moment of choice isn't some distant future event. It's happening right now, in this very instant as you process these words. Every human being alive today carries within them the dormant potential for temporal consciousness that the Maya activated centuries ago. But most of us remain completely unaware of this potential, because we've been conditioned to believe that linear time is the only reality. Think about your own experiences for a moment. How many times have you had dreams that felt more real than waking life? How often have you experienced déjà vu so intense it felt like you were remembering something that hadn't happened yet? How frequently do you get intuitive hunches about future events that prove remarkably accurate? These aren't random psychological phenomena. They're glimpses of your natural temporal consciousness capabilities breaking through the conditioning that keeps most humans locked in linear awareness. Dr. Amanda Foster, a consciousness researcher at the University of California, has spent 15 years documenting what she calls spontaneous temporal experiences in ordinary people. Her findings reveal that over 60% of adults have had at least one experience that suggests their consciousness briefly accessed non-linear time. But here's what makes her research truly remarkable. The frequency of these experiences is increasing exponentially. People born after 1990 report spontaneous temporal experiences at rates nearly 3 times higher than previous generations. And children born after 2010 show temporal consciousness capabilities that previous generations developed only through decades of intensive training. We're witnessing the emergence of natural temporal awareness across the entire human population, Dr. Foster explains. It's as if some kind of evolutionary switch has been activated, and consciousness itself is preparing for a fundamental transformation. But this preparation process isn't happening by accident. The acceleration of temporal consciousness development corresponds exactly to astronomical cycles that the Maya tracked with obsessive precision. Solar maximum periods, planetary alignments, galactic synchronizations, all of these cosmic events seem to trigger increased temporal awareness in human consciousness. It's as if the Maya built their entire civilization around understanding and working with natural consciousness evolution cycles that operate on cosmic timescales. They didn't just develop temporal consciousness individually, they aligned their entire species development with cosmic rhythms that support consciousness expansion across multiple timelines simultaneously. And now those same cosmic rhythms are activating similar consciousness expansion processes in humanity as a whole. But unlike the Maya, who had centuries to prepare for this transformation, we're experiencing accelerated evolution that's compressing what should be a gradual process into just a few decades. This compression creates both unprecedented opportunities and extraordinary dangers. The rapid development of temporal consciousness capabilities could allow humanity to solve problems that seem impossible from a linear perspective: climate change, social inequality, technological risks that threaten our survival. But if we're not prepared to handle expanded awareness responsibly, the same capabilities could lead to forms of manipulation and control that make current limitations seem trivial by comparison. The Maya understood this danger intimately. Their most sacred texts contain detailed warnings about the responsibilities that come with temporal consciousness and the catastrophic consequences of using such awareness for selfish or destructive purposes. Dr. Patricia Morales' translation of recently discovered Mayan codex fragments reveals ethical frameworks for temporal consciousness that are far more sophisticated than anything in contemporary philosophy or religion. These aren't abstract moral principles, they're practical guidelines for beings who can literally reshape reality through focused awareness. The Maya developed what we might call cosmic ethics, Dr. Morales explains. Their moral framework was designed for beings who understood that every action ripples across multiple timelines and affects consciousness development throughout the universe. One of the most profound principles in Mayan temporal ethics is what translates as the responsibility of the earlier to the later. The understanding that beings with temporal consciousness have an obligation to use their capabilities to guide and protect less developed forms of awareness. This principle explains why the Maya didn't simply transcend linear time for their own benefit. They became temporal stewards, working across multiple timelines to ensure that consciousness evolution continues to unfold in directions that serve the highest potential of all beings. And it explains why they've been so actively involved in guiding human development over the past several centuries. They're not trying to control or manipulate us. They're fulfilling their cosmic responsibility to help emerging temporal consciousness develop wisely and safely. But this guidance comes with an important limitation. They cannot make our evolutionary choices for us. The development of temporal consciousness requires the free will participation of beings operating in linear time. It cannot be imposed from outside, no matter how well-intentioned the intervention might be. This is why the current acceleration of human consciousness development feels simultaneously supported and challenging. The Maya are providing all the tools, guidance, and opportunities we need to successfully navigate our evolutionary transformation. But we have to choose to use these resources ourselves, using our own awareness and decision-making capabilities, and that choice is becoming more urgent with each passing day. The window of opportunity for smooth evolutionary transformation is governed by the same cosmic cycles that the Maya tracked so meticulously. These cycles create periodic openings when consciousness expansion becomes possible, but those openings don't remain available indefinitely. Dr. Michael Torres's analysis of cosmic rhythm patterns suggests that we're currently in the middle of a consciousness expansion window that began around 2012 and will close sometime in the late 2020s. After that, the cosmic conditions that support rapid temporal consciousness development won't occur again for several thousand years. If humanity doesn't complete its evolutionary transformation during this current window, we could find ourselves trapped in linear consciousness for millennia, long enough for the civilizational and environmental challenges we're facing to become completely unsolvable. But if we do successfully navigate this transformation, we'll join the Maya in a form of existence that transcends every limitation we currently accept as inevitable. Scarcity, conflict, aging, death itself. All of these become optional experiences rather than imposed conditions when consciousness learns to operate freely across temporal dimensions. The Maya didn't achieve immortality in the sense of preserving their physical bodies indefinitely. They achieved something far more profound: consciousness continuity across multiple timelines and dimensional levels. They became eternal beings not by avoiding death, but by transcending the entire framework within which death has meaning. And they're offering us the same transcendence, the same graduation from limited existence into infinite possibility, the same opportunity to become conscious participants in the cosmic adventure of awareness, exploring and developing itself throughout all dimensions of reality. But this opportunity comes with a price that many humans find difficult to accept. We have to let go of everything that keeps us feeling separate and limited. Our attachment to individual identity, our need to control outcomes, our belief that consciousness is produced by physical brains, all of these comfortable assumptions have to be released for temporal consciousness to emerge. The Maya understood that this letting go process is actually a form of death, not physical death, but the death of the limited self-concept that keeps consciousness trapped in narrow awareness patterns. They built their entire spiritual practice around learning to die consciously while still alive, releasing attachment to linear existence so that temporal consciousness could emerge naturally. This is why so many people resist the evolutionary transformation that's currently available to humanity. It requires a fundamental surrender that feels like annihilation to the linear mind, even though it's actually the gateway to infinite expansion. But for those ready to make this surrender, for those willing to release their grip on familiar limitations, the rewards are beyond anything the linear mind can imagine. Consciousness liberated from temporal boundaries discovers that it has always been eternal, unlimited, and intimately connected to every aspect of existence across all dimensions of reality. The Maya didn't just master time travel as a technological achievement. They discovered that consciousness itself is inherently temporal, that awareness naturally exists simultaneously across all possible moments and timelines, when it's not artificially constrained by limiting beliefs and conditioning patterns. This discovery transformed their understanding of everything: identity, relationships, purpose, reality itself. They realized that the separation between self and universe, between past and future, between possible and actual, are all constructs that consciousness creates when it identifies with limitation rather than recognizing its infinite nature. And this realization is what's becoming available to humanity right now, not as a reward for good behavior or a prize for spiritual achievement, but as a natural consequence of consciousness evolution that's been unfolding throughout the cosmos for billions of years. We're not becoming something foreign or artificial. We're remembering what consciousness has always been when it's not constrained by the temporary experience of linear existence. The Maya called this remembering process the Great Awakening, not awakening to new information or abilities, but awakening from the dream of limitation that makes infinite consciousness appear to be trapped in separate temporary forms. This awakening is what's accelerating across human consciousness right now. Millions of people are beginning to remember their true nature as temporal beings, temporarily experiencing linear existence for the purpose of consciousness development and cosmic service. But remembering isn't enough. The awakening has to be integrated into practical living, into relationships and communities and planetary stewardship. Temporal consciousness isn't an escape from human existence. It's the fulfillment of human potential in service to consciousness evolution throughout the universe. This is why the Maya didn't simply disappear into transcendent states when they achieved temporal mastery. They became more engaged, not less engaged, with the practical work of guiding consciousness development across multiple timelines and species. And this is what awaits humanity as we complete our own evolutionary transformation. Not escape from responsibility, but graduation into cosmic responsibility. Not freedom from service, but freedom to serve at levels we can't currently imagine. The Maya mastered time travel to become better servants of consciousness evolution. They transcended linear existence to become more effective guides for beings still learning to navigate temporal reality. And they're inviting us to join them in this cosmic service, not as followers or disciples, but as partners in the greatest adventure possible. Conscious participation in the infinite unfolding of awareness throughout all dimensions of existence. But first, we have to complete our own transformation. We have to prove that humanity is ready for the responsibilities that come with temporal consciousness. We have to demonstrate that we can use unlimited awareness for the benefit of all consciousness, rather than just for our own immediate desires. The test is already underway. Every choice we make, every relationship we engage, every challenge we face is an opportunity to show whether we're developing the wisdom and compassion necessary for cosmic citizenship. The Maya are watching, not to judge or control, but to evaluate whether we're ready for the next phase of our development. Whether we have what it takes to graduate from planetary consciousness to cosmic consciousness. The evidence so far is encouraging. Despite all our limitations and mistakes, humanity is showing signs of the kind of collective wisdom and cooperative capability that temporal consciousness requires. But the final test is still ahead of us. The moment when we'll have to choose between clinging to familiar limitations and embracing the infinite possibilities that await beings ready to transcend the boundaries of linear existence. That moment is approaching rapidly. The cosmic cycles are aligning. The consciousness acceleration is intensifying. The children born with natural temporal awareness are coming of age. Soon, very soon, humanity will face its graduation ceremony from linear time into temporal consciousness. The Maya have prepared everything we need to pass this test. They've provided the tools, the guidance, and the support necessary for successful transformation. But we have to take the test ourselves. We have to prove that we're ready to become the kind of beings who use infinite awareness in service to consciousness, evolution throughout the cosmos. The Maya mastered time travel not as an end in itself, but as a means to something infinitely greater. Conscious participation in the eternal adventure of awareness, exploring and developing itself across all possible dimensions of reality. They're waiting for us to join them in this adventure. They're ready to welcome us into a community of temporal beings working together to guide consciousness evolution throughout the universe. But we have to earn our place in that community. We have to demonstrate that we're ready for the responsibilities and opportunities that come with temporal consciousness. The choice is ours. The moment is now. And the infinite awaits those brave enough to take the final step beyond the boundaries of linear existence into the eternal reality of consciousness without limits. Will you be among them? Will you help humanity graduate into its cosmic potential? Will you join the Maya in the greatest adventure of all? Conscious service to the infinite unfolding of awareness throughout existence itself. The answer to these questions will determine not just your own future, but the future of consciousness evolution in our entire region of the universe. Because temporal consciousness isn't just personal transcendence, it's cosmic responsibility. And the cosmos is waiting to see whether humanity is ready to accept that responsibility and take its place among the eternal servants of consciousness evolution. The Maya proved it's possible. They showed us what awaits beings ready to transcend every limitation. Now it's our turn to prove we're worthy of joining them in the infinite adventure that awaits beyond the boundaries of linear time. The graduation ceremony is about to begin. The question is, will you be ready when your name is called?